Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us on this week's podcast for Arcadem. We are going to be focusing this week on emerging markets for iGaming. As always, that we have over the last few weeks, I've got Phillip and Christian on the line, so thanks very much for joining us, gentlemen.
No problem. Thank you.
So let's just dive straight in. Really good topic for this week's conversation. First question that I've got, guys, really are, what are the top 5 emerging markets for casino games right now?
So with emerging markets, it's always new markets coming on. But the top 5 at the moment, I would say we're looking at continent like Africa. India is going quite well. South America, one of the absolute biggest ones now is the US.
Yep.
Absolutely, because the US are starting regulating all the states.
Yes.
And then
Japan
as well. Japan as well. We're seeing a massive trend over in Japan. So I would say this is the 5 top markets at the moment that people are trying to penetrate with coming in.
What do you guys class then, or how are they classed as emergent themselves? And obviously he's talking about the US being one of the big ones. What makes them sort of an emerging market?
So the US is a really good example because what they're doing over there, they're kind of regulating each state, and each state has its own kind of regulatory body and regulation. So it's kind of, in fact, like a country in Europe. It's kind of like one is the UKGC near enough, one is kind of the Swedish one and a Danish one. So that's what each state's kind of doing. And it's actually impacting depending what state, because some states as well have kind of Indian gaming reservations, which then implement onto the state's regulations. So it's kind of, you have to see what happens in each state before you can kind of see what you're going to do in each state. It's really strange. And you can see a lot of casinos or sportsbook products going over and putting the flag down in a specific state and saying, this is our, New Jersey's ours. And it's really interesting to see how it's going. It's like the Wild West, but regulated Wild West. It's
right,
it's
okay.
Fun at the same time.
Do you think that's one of the things that's changed then and improved the presence of iGaming, that people are actually putting their stamp, on a specific state, in a specific area, saying, right, let's go. This is where iGaming is going to come next, and let's go for it.
I think it's good for branding because, you can push your brand further in that state, and then it'll just expose to the states that are kind of side by side, and it'll just bleed into them, and then it gets obviously around the entire country. But I think the biggest thing about the US market is, for such a long time, Nevada, the state with the land-based casinos, had such a grip. But I think it was loosening over the last couple of years, and that's why we kind of seen these regulatory states. But then I think with COVID impacting them so much, you've seen like massive brands like Caesar Entertainment buying William Hill International, which is such a big deal. What was it, 3.5 billion or something like that?
Yeah, there's a massive acquisition there.
Yeah.
And for Caesar's Entertainment to do an acquisition like that of a company like William Hill, that means that they mean business for the online world in America. So I think in the US market we'll see a lot of changes moving forward, especially with, as Philip mentioned, all the different regulations in states. It will be really hard to have a full picture of everything that's happening. So I think it will be an interesting journey to see how this works out. And I believe that this market will actually be flourishing as much as Europe has been in the start of iGaming, if not already very, very soon.
Yes, totally, because the players are used to, sports betting being not legal in some of these states, and casino being a very land-based, outdated kind of feel. But now they're coming into the fresh world of online gaming where it's completely different. You actually see it feels like a video game, and the graphics are better, and the RTP is actually more in the player's favor. Because in Vegas slots, they tend to be 70% RTP or lower, whereas online it's around 95, 96, 97. So they're going to be getting a lot more bang for the buck, as the Americans like to say, pardon the buck. But I feel just not even the industry as well, the players are going to want to play on the online sphere more because they're going to get value there, and they're going to get more entertainment as well, and they can do it from home.
Cool. So just talk a little bit, guys, then, if you wouldn't mind, just about the sort of some experiences you may have had actually physically working in these markets, these emerging markets, and how you can bring that to Arcadem.
I used to be the casino coordinator for Latin AM for Betson, and part of my markets were Peru, Brazil, Chile, and more of the Latin markets. And I was working on the established brand that was Betson, but then they launched the BetSafe brand as well in Peru and Chile. So I got to kind of experience what it's like to work on an established brand there that's been there for 10 years, dominating the Peruvian market, and then also working on a brand that's owned by the same company, but trying to build up a reputation there. And you learn about players' trends, because for me, obviously being from the UK, it's a completely different culture and the players work differently. So it's a lot of lessons, and that's what's exciting about an emerging market, because, you know, Peru, Chile and everything, you learn about their cultures, but in, for instance, the African continent market, you can learn about that. The US market, Japanese players are completely different as well. They like everything to be very formal, and you look at every single rule in the game just to make sure they know what they're talking about. So I think it's more a learning curve for everyone, because you have to learn about that specific culture and that specific, you know, country's play style, and then you can benefit by, you know, targeting some of your games there, or just improving your game experience overall.
Yeah. And also from a game developer or studio point of view for Arcadem, it's very important for us, depending on which market we enter. Like, for example, in Africa, you know, we're very used to having all the internet and the bandwidth we want here in Europe, but that's not the case in countries like Africa and India, where there's still, you know, they pay per data, per megabytes. So really high graphic games are not very popular in these areas because you cannot load them. So, for example, in Africa, Opera Mini is a browser most of us haven't even heard of. It's the most popular one in Africa, and that's due to the low bandwidth consumption. So these are things we have to think about as a game provider when we enter every market. Obviously, not with the US, which they have the same, but we always try to make sure that we cover all markets that we're trying to enter. So we do our research before and make sure that the player experience is still up to the scratch we want.
It's the same with the currency and the language as well. So we want a player to load up, you know, in Japan or Peru or wherever they are. They see their native language, they see the currency they want to play in, so it's not impacting their experience, because they're not going to load it up and not going to see euros and not going to see English, because they might not speak English. You know, not everyone in the world speaks English, so they're not going to understand what they're playing, and that's not good for a player experience. So we want them to load it up and say, oh, Japanese. If you look at Evil, for instance, it looks fantastic in Japanese. I can't stop looking at the game in Japanese. And it's just, I want players to understand that and being able to enjoy the experience even more than they would load up a game that's in English.
That was going to be one of my questions, right? Because ultimately, when we're looking at providing support for this, it's not just about the actual in-game experience itself. It's like what happens after that. You know, we've got to be able to provide, you know, the same experience that someone has, you know, in the UK to where they have, as you say, in Japan. So that has to be part and parcel of how we build for the future and into our games as well.
I mean, from a provider standpoint, we always want to make sure it's just a game, so we focus on that. Make sure the game, as you mentioned, the language, currency, whatever is for that country. But we would also support a casino, for instance, if they ask us to assist in marketing, if they wanted to do something for a specific market, if they wanted us to make a visual for them for that, you know, we'll cooperation, and because we want players to enjoy them, even marketing for them as well. So we're all on board with that cooperation. You know, it's not just the provider and the operator. You know, we work as a team as well. And I think the operator's job is to support the customer, and ours is also as well via them. So we're willing to build that bridge and help as much as possible.
Absolutely, it's always we always support the operators in any way we can. For us, we have a good communication channel with everybody we work with. So as Philip said, we provide them. We have regular talks with everybody we serve in this every area to make sure they're happy, and if there's anything they need, we make sure that we help them with their needs to make sure that everything's a success from their end.
And one of the things that we've talked about at quite length, actually, and I think we did a podcast a couple of weeks ago regarding responsible gaming. So let's just take responsible gaming, and how do we deal with it from a company perspective in these new markets that we're merging into?
I mean, for us, we don't think about that, because all our games, we focus on responsible gambling anyway. We don't care if it's a regulated market or a non-regulated market. We make sure our games are safe for players regardless. So it's never an afterthought, it's always a pre-thought. So we don't even think about it when we're doing the game production, because it's already there in the GUI layout of our games. So for us, it doesn't matter. It's always there regardless. Yeah. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure the games are safe. So that's what they are.
Yes, not also as Philip just follow responsible gaming as we had the podcast a few weeks ago. It's always in our forefront, in our minds. So everything with responsible gaming and legislation in these markets, it goes hand in hand almost. That we make sure that the games are ready and they are protecting the players, so to say.
Final question I've got just on this overall topic of emergent. So is there any sort of potential markets that are emerging right now that, you know, we sort of look as potential for us to try and get into at a later stage, either 2021 or even further down the line, that you think might be an opportunity for us to be part of?
For us, we're already in kind of Latin, we're in Africa, we're in Japan. For me, the US market is the one where we're looking at, and 2 months time we could be in the US market. We don't know. Someone might want to take our content there. So that's something we're focusing on, but we're not focusing specifically into one market because we want to service players around the world. So I think it's very narrow-minded to focus in one area. It's good to see that, but you need to keep your eye on the ball in the rest of the world.
Yes, we're all about making games that players want to play, that they enjoy. It should be an entertainment for them. It should not be... some people like these classic machines, but then you go to a small niche group. But we are more, we're trying to make our games more friendly to everybody, so to say. So there's no just, this game is only made for Europe, this game is only made for Asia. Obviously with certain areas, we will have to, there will be maybe it's not in Africa, certain countries say we cannot release the games due to, as we mentioned before, internet connectivity and so forth.
Yeah.
But otherwise, we're always looking forward. I think the US would be the most exciting one out to enter after all these years with illegal gambling going on in the US online. They're finally legalizing it now, which is very exciting.
That's all the time we've got for. So thanks very much for taking the time this morning. And we'll look forward to catching up with you next week, boys. All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
All right.
Cheers, guys. Bye. Bye-bye.